So my sister-in-law, for my birthday back in April, she gave me this book called Holy Hurt by Hillary McBride. And that really was the inspiration for doing this service. Hillary McBride is a PhD in psychology, and she's done a tremendous amount of work and research with people who have suffered many different kinds of trauma from their religious past. And I know this is a big topic, it's a heavy topic. I think about Anne Lamott. I love Anne Lamott. One of the things she says is that when she shows up to church, sometimes she likes to think that it would have been better if instead of a order of service that was handed out at the door, that they had handed out life vests for people. Because, and she thinks that that's right, actually, that's what we should be doing. We should be asking these big and hard and tough questions with each other. And of course, we'll also have moments of joy too. I'm excited for my sermon in a couple of weeks where I'll be talking about bicycling with butterflies. But that's to come. Today we're doing Holy Hurt, and I want to give people lots of space, lots of permission. If at any time in this service this feels too intense for you, feel free to get up, walk around, step out. I want you to do what is right for you. I will be talking about religious trauma, not going too deep into any particular story, but I will be mentioning it in this service, in this sermon. I was speaking with a colleague this week. I went out with I have these two colleagues that I'm very close to. One is an Episcopal priest and the other is a Presbyterian minister. And we tend to go out pretty much every week. And he was talking, the two of them were talking about how the reading in the lectionary, which is the schedule of readings that their traditions ask them to preach on each week, that this week it included the parable of the lost coin in Luke. And I hadn't thought to preach on that this week, but I thought, why not? I'll go ahead and preach right alongside my interfaith colleagues here, because I actually think it's quite relevant. The parable of the lost coin. A woman has 10 silver coins, and she loses one. And she turns the house upside down. She lights a lamp. She calls her neighbors to come help her, and she's searching for this coin. And then when she finds it, she celebrates. I'm thinking about how when we talk about the pain that we have from our past, the difficulty that we're holding, and really whether it's from religious communities or from relationships that have been tumultuous or difficult, whether it's from other parts of our lives, sometimes it becomes difficult to know what we're even searching for. Sometimes the pain and the loss is so deep that we struggle to understand what it is we're even going to do with it, what it even means to try to find that and offer it some kind of salve or healing. I'm thinking about the definition of trauma itself. It comes from the Greek, and the word itself means wound. And there's been a whole lot of thought and research that has gone into trauma in the later part of the 20th century and different definitions that are offered. Hillary McBride talks about how trauma is a kind of shattering that occurs. You know, we don't, with trauma, just have an uncomfortable experience or an easily digestible experience. Instead, it's something that shatters a part of ourselves, a part of our belief in the world, a part of our belief in how relationships should be. Susan Neiman is a philosopher, and I really like her definition of evil because I think that it actually could be used equally well for trauma. She talks about evil as that which shakes our trust in the world. And I think that could very well be a definition that we use for trauma. It's what shakes our trust in the world. So it shakes our trust in human relationships, in connections, in the idea that the world is just or loving or good, that healing can occur. It shakes that. It shatters that. And so we're left with the pieces, left with wondering what it is that we are to do with that. Now, Unitarian Universalists, about 10% of us grew up Unitarian Universalists, and then there's 90% that come from other faith traditions. And I have heard many, many stories from people about their religious past. And sometimes there are traditions and practices that people want to lift up from their past and bring with them and carry with them and that they honor and still practice. And then there's also parts of that religious past that are especially painful, especially difficult, that they have a difficulty digesting and even really knowing exactly what to do with it. Spiritual trauma can look like a lot of different things. Sometimes it's being raised in a church and you're repeatedly told that your beliefs are invalid, that your doubts are not welcome, that you need to believe this particular thing in order to be saved. And if you don't, then there's something wrong with you. And when that's reinforced, not only by your church community, but by your family, when it becomes this, context in which you're repeatedly told that your beliefs are wrong or they are invalid, that can amount to that kind of shattering that we're talking about, in which your ability to sort of have an open relationship with other people and a trust that they have the best intentions for your growth and your well-being, it can break that and shatter it. There are other forms of religious trauma as well. One of my friends, he's gay, and it took him a long time to come out. His parents were very conservative, and he grew up in a very conservative church. And he is a minister with the United Church of Christ. And not too long ago, we were talking about watching, there was this film, and now I'm blanking on the name of it, but it got a lot of press. I'll have to try to remember that later. But it was about a young man who grew up Mormon and had to go, and was forced to go through conversion therapy. And my friend watched this film, and he said it kind of came back to him all at once. It was like this light bulb going off, this wave that washed over him, where he said, "That's what I went through." And he didn't even know it. And I asked him about it, and he said, as soon as I got out of that, I just pushed it aside. I did not want to think about it anymore. It was too much. It was almost like he had forgotten that had even happened to him until he saw this film, and it brought it all back. And then he remembered some of the pain that came along with that. And luckily, he's in therapy and talked to me about that and how this has become a part of the stuff that he's looking at now. But that's another way that religious communities have caused incredible pain and suffering in people's lives. And then there's also the reality of clergy abuse. Mm-hmm. And the stories of that continue to emerge in religious communities. I would say the scandal that happened in the Catholic Church at the end of the 1990s and into the early 2000s and beyond, that continues to happen. It has reshaped American religion far beyond just the Catholic Church, and it has in some ways really shattered people's faith that religion is even a force for good, and that's legitimate. It's also reshaped practices in many communities, and Unitarian Universalism is one of them. We didn't fully come to update and revise our ministerial standards until 2015, and we now have very clear understandings and boundaries around what ministers can do and can't do, and if you do it, then you're out of the ministry, and it was absolutely the right choice and what needed to occur. But those stories of abuse and the rippling effect that they had in people's lives, and that they had in that they had in people's lives, and that they had in those communities that suffered from that abuse, I think we're still grappling with it. I think that, again, it's like the parable of the lost coin, except that we don't know exactly what has been lost. We don't know how to find what has been lost. We don't know how to put all of the pieces together. And so in some ways, we're just kind of moving through the dark and trying to do the best that we can when we confront and acknowledge the magnitude of the pain that people have felt and experienced. On a slight tangent here, I am very, very excited about Friday because my current favorite artist, Ethel Cain, is coming to Chicago, and my sister is coming to Chicago. We're gonna go see Ethel Cain together, and I've just been looking forward to this concert. As soon as I saw that she was coming, I bought tickets. Now, Ethel Cain grew up Southern Baptist. Her dad was a deacon in the church, and she joined the choir. It's really where she learned to sing. That's where she found her talent for singing. At 20, she came out as trans, and her music reflects the pain and the struggle that she held as she was growing up in that context. And we got a taste of that with Sun-Bleached Flies. And that line, just sticks with me so much, and I heard people gasp a bit when they heard it. What I wouldn't do to be in church this Sunday, listening to the choir so heartfelt, all singing, God loves you, but not enough to save you. And I think that captures some of the trauma and abuse that religious communities have inflicted on people, and that have caused enormous challenge for people to recover from that. I guess we have an alarm going off. I'm not sure what for, but anyway, so her lyrics, I think, put this, tell this story in such a beautiful and exquisite way. And one of the things that I think that she's doing in this music is that she is exploring exactly, for her, what was lost by those experiences, what was shaken, what was shattered. She's exploring what her relationship is with her religious past. And then she's not only letting it stay at that level of trauma, of unresolved grief, she's very honest about that unresolved grief in her lyrics, but she's also doing something different with it. By bringing it into her music, I think that what she's doing is transforming it in a way. She's interacting with it in a way that she wasn't before. She's naming it, and she's also talking about her path out of that religious pain, out of that religious context, into a place where she isn't as closed in by that community that didn't recognize her humanity. I think that that's one of the things that we can do when we encounter those painful parts of our past. One of my friends, a colleague out in California, she is a therapist as well, and she does art therapy. And she has on her Facebook page, not her profile pic, but the cover pic or whatever, it says like, "Have you made art about it?" And I love that so much. And I think that that's what Ethel Cain is doing. She's making art about it. Now, making art about it isn't going to fully resolve all that she's carrying. And I don't think that she thinks that it could. And I don't think that's a realistic thing to expect. However, it opens up a possibility for holding that grief in a different way, exploring it, and finding a different way of moving forward in the world. Now, Hillary McBride says that as we encounter those parts of ourselves that may have been wounded from our religious past, that there are certain practices, one of them is that creativity, that making art, but there are certain practices that allow us to be gentle with ourselves and that allow us to kind of bring that pain that we experienced in the past into our experience today and maybe begin to interact with it in another way. One of the things that she talks about is that if you hear a particular figure or book or idea, a particular word like God or name like Jesus or book like something from the Bible, if we have a kind of knee-jerk response to that, which is really understandable. It's so understandable to have that when we consider the pain that kind of language has caused for people. So understandable. But one of the things that she talks about is that when we have a response like that, we can be gentle with ourselves and we can be curious about that response. What is causing me to have that response right now? Maybe there's a story that surrounds that. Maybe it's a bunch of stories, a kind of repeated use of that word that has been abusive. Being able to name it, being able to explore what it means rather than just sort of having the response and then pushing it aside can be a very, very powerful way in which we encounter religious trauma. She talks about the freedom in religious communities to participate or not to participate. And one of the things that you'll notice me say every time we sing a hymn is, please rise and join us as you are willing and able. And that willing part is really important because I think that as a religious community, we need to normalize the idea that you don't have to participate in things that bring up that kind of pain for you or that reinforce that kind of pain for you. You are free to participate in this religious community in whatever way is going to be the most healing for you. And sometimes that means not singing along. Sometimes that means not joining in with particular groups that are exploring different topics. Creating a place where that's honored rather than a place that views that as wrong or says that there's something wrong with you. I mean, that's something that I really try to hold in our religious community together. Another thing that she talks about is allowing diverse viewpoints. I actually think that this might be a little bit easier for Unitarian Universalists than some other traditions that require assent to a particular creed. We don't have a creed, and so we are open to those multiple and diverse viewpoints. And then she talks about finding ways to reclaim that experience, creatively explore those experiences as well. So I'm thinking again about the parable of the lost coin. And I'm thinking about this. I'm not sure that coin that was lost is ever going to be fully retrievable. Because if we have a traumatic experience and it is truly trauma, it shatters our understanding of the world. And it's kind of like you can't put the toothpaste back in the bottle, right? It's already out, it's already over. And so we're not going to be able to find that lost coin. But I think there's some interesting things in that parable that actually invite us to think about how we might hold that trauma. She brings the community together to help her search. I love that. Brings the community together to help her search. When we feel like it's safe enough for us, when we've established that sense of safety for us and we've established that in the community, perhaps this is a healing place where we can explore some of those parts of ourselves and name it and put it into narrative rather than holding it in and holding that pain in. I think another thing is that we might work on acceptance that that thing is lost. And that might be something we're not ready to arrive at yet, because I think that is something that we have to continue to work on, especially with the more painful and troubling things that could have happened. But perhaps eventually, and I sort of hear this in Ethel Cain's lyrics, I can't cite the exact ones, but there's this sense there that we might be able to come to this place where we are able to name and accept that something happened. We can't change it. This is a part of who we are. It's a part of our story. And so we're going to go forth from here and make meaning in our lives, in spite of the fact that we can't go back and change that. There's, in the parable, like this is one where there's lots of movement. She's turning the house upside down. She's, tearing things apart. She's looking for this coin. And one of the things that I think can be really helpful with trauma, and this comes from Bessel van der Kolk in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. He talks a lot about how it's actually movement and a sort of engagement with the body that can make a difference with trauma, that can help us hold it in a different way. Some of us who practice yoga, like we sometimes talk about how when we do a deep hip opening or we do a back bend, what it does is it sometimes frees something that was stuck in our bodies, and we might process that with tears or laughter. Things are held in the body. And so I think finding that movement is really important. And then, of course, that making something new as well. Love is at the center. No one is excluded from the circle of love. I've said this multiple times now. This is my understanding of what Unitarian Universalism is. It emerges from my understanding of what our Universalist heritage teaches us. And that idea that no one is excluded from the circle of love, I find new ways that is applied that completely surprise me. And as I was reading about and exploring this concept of holy hurt, it came to me. It came to me that concept that no one is excluded from the circle of love, that includes us in all of our fullness, in the fullness of the stories that we bring, in that pain and that trauma and that difficulty. The more we hold that with self-compassion and kindness and find ways within this religious community to create safety so that we can hold that together, that is an expansion of that circle of love that no one is excluded from, us included. May we find ever widening applications to that circle. May we find each other and ourselves in that circle. My spiritual companions, I love you. I love you.